Steve loved exploring. The woods behind his house were his favorite place. Every leaf, every rock held a new adventure. One sunny afternoon Steve ventured deeper than usual. He climbed over fallen logs and hopped across a rushing stream. The air grew cooler, and the forest seemed to whisper secrets. Steve was determined to uncover them. He spotted a narrow path he'd never seen before. Curiosity bubbled inside him. He followed it, pushing aside leafy branches. The path led to a rocky cliff face, seemingly a dead end, but Steve didn't give up. He noticed something odd, a patch of moss that seemed to cover a small opening. Could it be a cave? He brushed away the moss, revealing a dark hole just big enough to crawl through. Steve's heart pounded. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to be brave. He ducked down and entered the cave, his curiosity burning brighter than any fear. The cave was dark and damp. Steve felt his way carefully, his hand brushing against cold, rough stone. The air hung heavy and still. He could hear the faint sound of dripping water echoing in the darkness. As he ventured deeper, a faint light appeared in the distance. It grew stronger as he walked, revealing a large, cavernous space. The cave shimmered with an ethereal glow. Sunlight streamed through a crack in the ceiling, illuminating crystal-clear water cascading into a pool below. Strange plants, unlike anything Steve had ever seen, grew in clumps around the edges of the pool, their leaves a vibrant, almost luminous green. The air felt different here, warmer somehow, and filled with the strange scent of unknown flowers. Then, Steve saw it. In the center of the cavern, a creature beyond his wildest dreams lay sleeping. Its scales shimmered like emeralds in the dappled sunlight, and its chest rose and fell with each deep breath. It was a dinosaur, a creature seemingly lost to time yet very much alive. The dinosaur was enormous, its body longer than a bus. Its scales were a deep emerald green, flecked with gold that glinted in the sunlight streaming through the cave opening. The dinosaur's head rested on its massive, clawed feet, its eyes closed in slumber. It seemed so peaceful, so majestic that Steve could barely breathe. He stood frozen, torn between the urge to run and the desire to get closer. Cautiously, Steve took a step forward. The ground crunched under his foot, and the dinosaur's head shot up. Its eyes, large and golden, met Steve's with a curious gaze. It didn't seem angry, not yet anyway. It lowered its head slightly, sniffing the air. Steve held his breath, his heart pounding. The dinosaur let out a low rumble, a sound that echoed through the cavern. "Hello?" Steve whispered, his voice barely audible. The dinosaur tilted its head as if listening intently. It took a step closer, its massive size making Steve feel tiny. "Don't be afraid," Steve said, his voice gaining a bit of confidence. "I won't hurt you." The dinosaur seemed to understand, its gaze softening. It lowered its head again, nudging Steve's outstretched hand with its snout. "I think," Steve said, a smile spreading across his face, "I think we might be friends." He decided to name the dinosaur Archon, a name that felt strong and ancient, just like the magnificent creature before him. Over the next few days, Steve visited Archon every chance he got. He brought the dinosaur fruits and vegetables from his garden, which Archon seemed to enjoy. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as they sat by the pool in the cave, Archon let out a low rumble. He gestured with his head towards the back of the cave. Steve noticed for the first time that behind the pool, hidden by the cascading water, was a narrow tunnel. "You want me to follow you?" Steve asked, his voice filled with apprehension and excitement. Archon nodded, his golden eyes filled with an unspoken invitation. Together, boy and dinosaur ventured deeper into the cave. The tunnel opened into a vast network of caverns, each more breathtaking than the last. Luminous fungi lit the way, casting an otherworldly glow on walls covered in prehistoric paintings. Strange and wonderful creatures, some small and furry, others large and reptilian, scurried about, seemingly undisturbed by the presence of a boy and a dinosaur. Archon had shown Steve a hidden world, a place where time seemed to stand still. It was a world teeming with life, a world untouched by the modern world outside. Steve realized he had stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, something he knew he had to protect. The weight of his discovery pressed heavily on Steve's young shoulders. He knew that if word of the dinosaurs and the hidden world got out, everything would change. People would flock to see the creatures. Scientists, tourists, and worst of all, those who would exploit them. He had to keep Archon and his kind safe. His fears were confirmed one evening when he overheard his uncle, a park ranger, talking about strange tracks found in the forest. Poachers, he'd said, looking for rare animals to sell on the black market. They had heard whispers of something unusual in the area, something big. Steve's blood ran cold. He knew he had to warn Archon. He raced back to the cave, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Archon by the pool, his massive head resting on his front legs. "Archon," Steve said, his voice breathless. "We're in danger. Poachers, they're looking for you." Archon's head shot up, his golden eyes filled with concern. He let out a low growl, a sound that echoed Steve's own fear. Steve knew what he had to do. He had to lead the poachers away from the cave, protect Archon and the other creatures at all costs. He was just a boy, but he was all that stood between them and the outside world. "Archon," Steve said, his voice determined. "I have a plan, but I need your help." He explained his idea to Archon, who listened intently, his head cocked to one side. They would use Archon's size and strength to their advantage, creating a diversion to draw the poachers away from the cave entrance. It was a risky plan, but it was their only chance. Under the cover of darkness, Steve and Archon left the safety of the cave. They moved silently through the forest, careful to avoid the well-worn paths. Steve led the way, using his knowledge of the woods to guide them towards the area where his uncle had mentioned the poachers were sighted. The sounds of the forest seemed amplified, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, making Steve jump. He could feel Archon's presence beside him, a comforting weight in the darkness. They reached a clearing, moonlight bathing the open space in an ethereal glow. Steve paused, listening for any sign of the poachers. Suddenly, a harsh voice broke the silence. "Over there! I saw something move!" Two figures emerged from the trees, flashlights in hand, their beams dancing across the clearing. "It's huge!" one of them shouted, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. Steve's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. Steve took a deep breath and stepped into the open, raising his hands above his head. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the night. "I'm over here!" The poachers turned, their flashlights momentarily blinding Steve. He heard Archon let out a low growl from the trees behind him, and the poachers froze. "What do you think you're doing here, kid?" one of the poachers growled, taking a step towards Steve. "This is private property. You're the ones trespassing," Steve said, his voice trembling slightly but firm. "And you're hunting endangered animals." He could feel Archon shifting behind him, ready to charge if needed. "Endangered animals?" the other poacher scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, now get out of here before you get hurt." They started to advance on Steve again, their flashlights wavering. Steve knew he couldn't let them get any closer to the cave. He had to make a choice, a difficult one. "Archon!" Steve shouted, and with a deafening roar the dinosaur burst from the trees. The poachers, caught completely off guard, stumbled back, their eyes wide with terror. Archon let out another roar, the ground trembling beneath their feet. It was enough. The poachers, their courage shattered, turned and fled into the darkness. With the immediate danger past, Archon returned to Steve's side. The boy placed a reassuring hand on the dinosaur's massive leg, his heart still pounding from the encounter. "We did it, Archon," Steve whispered, relief washing over him. "We scared them off." Archon let out a low rumble, a sound that Steve had come to recognize as a sign of agreement. They stood for a moment longer in the clearing, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant hooting of an owl. The forest felt different now, somehow calmer, as if a storm had passed. Steve knew that the danger wasn't entirely gone. The poachers might return, or others might follow in their footsteps. But for now, at least, Archon and the hidden world were safe. As they made their way back towards the cave, Steve couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. He had stumbled upon a world beyond his wildest dreams, a world that had been hidden for millions of years. He had befriended a dinosaur, a creature thought to be extinct, and he had faced danger head-on, protecting what he believed in. He had changed too. He was no longer just a curious boy who loved exploring the woods. He was a protector, a guardian of secrets. He had a purpose now, a responsibility to ensure that the hidden world remained hidden, a safe haven for Archon and all the creatures that called it home. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky with hues of pink and orange as Steve reached the cave entrance. He turned to face Archon, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he couldn't stay here forever. He had a life to live in the outside world, a life that, until recently, had seemed so ordinary. "I have to go back now, Archon," Steve said, his voice filled with sadness. but I promise I won't forget you. I'll come back and visit whenever I can." Archon nudged Steve's shoulder gently with his snout, as if understanding his words. "And I'll do everything I can to protect you in this place," Steve vowed, his voice firm with determination. "I won't let anyone hurt you." With a final pat on Archon's leg, Steve turned and stepped back through the opening, leaving the hidden world behind. The forest seemed different now, not just because he knew what lay hidden within its depths, but because he himself was different. He carried the weight of his secret, but also the strength of his newfound purpose. He would no longer just explore the woods, he would protect them. He would learn everything he could about dinosaurs and ancient history. He would become an advocate for their preservation, sharing their story with the world, but only when the time was right. For now, the hidden world would remain a secret, a treasure tucked away in the heart of the forest, safe under the watchful eye of a boy who had made a promise to remember.